Hello, I'm Kearney, and today I'll be presenting on Walker Evans' Brooklyn Bridge, a part of the Kevin and Karen Kennedy collection. So, although this image is small in size, coming in at 4¼ inches by 2½ inches, it comes with great impact. And so, a brief overview of my presentation today. I'll be giving you a brief introduction, kind of talking about Walker Evans, his history, kind of why the Brooklyn Bridge as an art subject, a comparison of Joseph Stella versus Evans' Brooklyn Bridge, the composition, subject, his series, and kind of the later works and career highlights of Evans. So Evans was born in 1903 in St. Louis, Missouri. He spent most of his childhood in the suburbs of Chicago. He became interested in photography as a child when he was taking pictures of his family and friends while collecting penny postcards, and he started off with a very beginner, inexpensive Kodak camera. He attended Williams College for a year, then left to pursue his literary passion in the city of New York. So when he got there, he kind of worked in a bookstore and he worked at the New York Public Library, but then decided to go to Europe and went to France, like a lot of artists did at the time. But after a year in France in 1927, he came back to New York City, and he was intent on becoming a writer, but also took up the camera and kind of gradually redirected his aesthetic impulses to apply these literary concepts like irony and lyricism to his photography. So at the time, photography had grown from this very commercial documentary style of photography and like this very commercial functioning to a fine form of art. And his European experiences exposed him to this like strict geometrical form of modern art, but he kind of disliked this pretentiousness and the precociousness of art photography and really wanted to capture the sincerity of art photography by just taking moments for what they were and really bringing life to its truest form in his work. So why the Brooklyn Bridge? Evans lived in Brooklyn Heights, and from the windows of his apartment, he had a fine view of the Brooklyn Bridge. He was inspired to take a closer look. He didn't know what angle to approach the bridge, so he recorded the impressions of it with a camera he habitually carried with him in his pocket. In 1929, when he really started to take photos of the bridge, it had become this unexciting kind of link between the boroughs of Manhattan to Brooklyn. So it was kind of hardly even noticed by the hurried commuters, and he kind of wanted to show the national character of the bustling city of New York, and he kind of had this gift to perceive something that was familiar as if it was never seen before by taking a new approach to looking at the bridge and restore the Brooklyn Bridge's original wonder. So the Brooklyn Bridge was kind of the largest work of art in his world at the time. And his decision to make the bridge the focus of his photography for this series that he started kind of marked the true beginning of his lifelong career as a documentary photographer, whose work would serve as this honest, vital representation of American and city life. So in comparing Joseph Stella's painting of the Brooklyn Bridge to Evans's Brooklyn Bridge that we saw in the Kennedy collection, it was kind of this marker of technological advancement in the city, of engineering and architecture, and it arose many New York-based artists to kind of treat it as their subject, and they took this very futuristic, exciting approach to the city and how the bridge was kind of this mending gap to bring people into this beautiful place, but Walker Evans wanted to take a more real approach to it and depict industrial America in a very different viewpoint. So Stella, you can see, focuses on the bridge from a very lateral view, taking the bold shapes and the sweeping cable cords of the bridge as the structure as a whole kind of comes together with the city in the background and lights and color. And Walker Evans takes this very industrial approach, but kind of wanted to expose life for what it was and what it is today. So he takes this very different perspective, kind of shocking the viewer out of complacency with a photograph that's very stark but honest to capture the true essence of the bridge at the time. So looking at the subject of the bridge, he takes this very unconventional approach And instead of like looking at the commotion of the 20th century transportation across the bridge, Evan angles himself below the bridge in this photograph, maintaining the idea that the chaos of everyday life kind of exists still on the other side and even below the bridge. So he's shooting the bridge from this spot as his artistic ambition was to take viewers to the parts of life that they didn't always see. And in doing so, he kind of exposes this reality of the bridge and what goes on below, this kind of forgotten story that there's still life and activity below the bridge, bringing people to see something different than what other artists exposed in their art. So by kind of looking at the underside of the Brooklyn Bridge and the realities of everyday life with the boats in the river and the faint city skyline in the background, he's demonstrating that there's even activity kind of surrounding the city and below the normal everyday traffic of what goes on. He also takes the literary concept of irony to this photograph of the Brooklyn Bridge by he kind of shoots it from a place that shows it as the underbelly of the beast connecting the boroughs to Brooklyn, and kind of uses it as this metaphor that this strong structure is what connects us all to each other. And so by placing the city skyline in the background, it's kind of suggestive of a city that has to keep on moving. And there's kind of this poetic resonance of the common fact that he placed the bridge in the center of the photograph, showing that this was kind of the connector to the city. And without this bridge that kind of breaks up the flow of the buildings, there wouldn't be that kind of normal functioning of the city, and it wouldn't be able to function properly without this pathway connecting us all together. So he kind of takes this new perspective by giving people the full scope of what exists beyond the bridge's upper level and what kind of goes on below. So he steered away from the romanticism that artists in the past had taken, kind of using the Brooklyn Bridge as their subject by presenting this new style of art that isn't inherently beautiful, but it's very captivating at the same time. It kind of becomes this icon of modernity and American marvel of engineering and architecture, and also a symbol of strength and endurance for people to recognize as this prominent fixture of society. So in looking at the composition, we kind of see the sharp angles, the boldness of the bridge, these compressed tones, the textured lines, the symmetry, the framing, and that kind of all brings together this unconventional viewpoint that makes it feel this, it's a very contemporary composition capturing the bold forms of the structure and these stark, arresting geometric designs. So the lines they come in very strong at the top, and kind of show that it's a force not to be reckoned with, and it's very dark. And by placing this bold bridge right in the middle of the photograph, it's very much takes up the upper level of the picture, kind of showing that the majority of it is leading towards the city, and then you kind of see how it folds into the city towards the back. These compressed tones of the faint city skyline and the light sky above contrast the darkness of the bridge that brings people across. And the textured lines of the road beneath is a great counter to the smooth roads that lie above that get us back and forth every day. And the symmetry of the skyline, like I said earlier, is broken up by the bridge, adding to the idea that its function was to add order, and it was a means to keep us moving in this ever-changing, bustling society, this metropolis of New York. So the framing of the bridge in this photograph allows for this very formal assessment of the engineering structure, how it looks, and how you'd experience it if you were there in person. So the Brooklyn Bridge series, this was a compilation of photographs that he took of the Brooklyn Bridge. He made sure to take all these different perspectives, looked at it from above, below, from the side. He looked at people on the bridge, where the cables were, just to provide this very full perspective of it all. And then, just briefly, this kind of series was the kind of segue into his this title becoming coined as the father of American documentary photography. He worked as the Farm Security Administration photographer, gaining notoriety for his photographs of American life. He had an exhibition at the MoMA with a following publication. He received different Guggenheim fellowships throughout his career. He was also a staff photographer for Time and Fortune, and then ultimately landed himself a job as a professor of graphic arts at Yale. So his precisely composed, intricately detailed photographs insisted on their subject matter and made for these very telling, true moments that were documented in American history, that were very aesthetically pure and honest, vital interpretations and representations of American life.